Thank you very much. So happy Teachers' Day, dear colleagues. It's the 5th of October in Kyrgyzstan. It's Teachers' Day. So the title of my talk is MuslimTema, talking to lesbian, bisexual, and queer women in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. It's based on an ongoing study that I am leading here. It's a project by, it's run by a local LGBTQ organization called Lapis, and it's a participatory action research. So I will tell you a little bit more about it later. The word tema in the title also refers to the local term for the queer scene that the queer people in Kyrgyzstan or in post-Soviet space in general use to refer to themselves. LGBTQ is also used, but it's more common among activists. So most kind of widely used term of self-referral is tema, and literally it means theme. But to be tema or to be teme means to be in the know. So it acts also as a kind of a code. Whether you're an insider, whether you have like an insider knowledge or not, whether you're part of a certain social community or not. So my colleague Georgy Mamedov also did some research about forms of sociality, how sexuality is also a type of, it's primarily understood as a type of sociality in the local context. And he presented about that actually recently at a workshop at Indiana University. So I guess what I'm going to address is this intersection of sexuality and religiosity. And usually, because of the kind of hegemonic views of monotheistic religions towards same-sex sexuality and other types of, gender distance, the LGBTQ individuals are often seen as either indifferent or antagonistic toward religion, and it's seen that religious identity and practice is somehow in contradiction with identifying as lesbian, transgender, queer, etc. So a lot of studies actually have looked at what does it mean, how do people reconcile these identities of being Muslim and gay or lesbian or queer or transgender at the same time. And so some critics have looked at, basically they have criticized this drive kind of for wholeness, the fallacy of trying to seek this coherent and whole selves, in individuals, and they have kind of called for our that we should embrace somehow ambiguity that we actually observe, that people do live with contradictions, and it's just kind of part of this existence. But also kind of within this binary model with same-sex sexuality on the one hand and Islam on the other hand, the one part is somehow associated with West and with the idea of freedom, while the other one is somehow associated with homophobia and persecution. So there has been also a movement within LGBTQ movement, like a tendency within LGBTQ movement to try and reconcile these contradictions through reinterpretation of religious texts. So they look for kind of affirming interpretations of the Quran or the Hadith, and so it kind of puts emphasis on this very textual, intellectual, and theological ways of resolving this contradiction. But again, some critics have said that this kind of overlooks the other types of understanding or embodied experiences, lived experiences that kind of bring together religion and sexuality. To humans, being both Muslim and LGBTQ is something beyond words, he says. It is embodied and lived. So I also agree that we cannot somehow reduce entire culture or identity to one text. So I am kind of in agreement with this criticism. And also, Kyrgyzstan is very much part of the global processes and global discourses. It's part of the same kind of discussions around human rights. For instance, in the local activist communities, there is this idea of the coming out as, the ultimate kind of outcome of self-realization. That it's this kind of practice of disclosing oneself to the world, which is also almost like a religious experience. And if you don't come out, then within this activist circles, it's seen that you have not achieved some kind of authentic self. I would also kind of object to this kind of discourses, and also, so we have also this in the language of sexual emancipation, somehow the equation of gender equality and sexual liberation with kind of modernization or westernization. And we see that both in the conservative discourse and the liberal discourse, right? So this kind of neglects the history of it neglects the historical fact that this idea that sex and love can only occur between two married heterosexuals. It's a relatively recent norm, and that and it's one that came about during the process of colonization or modernization or westernization, whatever you call it. And it ignores it ignores the sexual plurality that existed in the Muslim communities and cultures before the encounters with the so-called West. And but at the same time, we must recognize that sexuality remains kind of a central element, or the central argument through which Muslimness is enforced, and also the policing of sexuality is often justified through discourses of morality, cultural authenticity, and religion. So another point I wanted to make before I go into the description of our project is that there are some projects that look at kind of the repression of women's sexuality only, but we must recognize that this repression is also linked to the repression of stigmatized sexualities in general, right? So this enforcement of compulsory heterosexuality is part and parcel of so it's all kind of aspects of the same process. Recently when I was reading the memoirs of a colonial administrator with Boshin, published in 1916. It's called "Пол жизни в Turkestani," Half Alive in Turkestan. I came across two of the entries. So he writes this book in a kind of fashion where he describes an existing problem and then he proposes a solution to it. So one of the major problems to Boshin was the practice of bachabozi, so this culture of dancing boys, and he basically, to him, it's not only an abhorrent sin, it's also a kind of an undesirable social phenomenon that prostitutes young boys and condemns them to a life of thieving and idleness, and even sometimes he describes it leads to murders, and he says that the blood of the murdered is on the hands of the Russian administration. So he basically advocates for the cases of sodomy, as he calls it, to be prosecuted according to the Russian criminal courts and not to be allowed to be tried in the local courts. So, and also he has another chapter on Kusa. So it's about this, it's a legend about how the beardless men and the bearded women appeared in this world. So this kind of gender ambiguous or maybe transgender or intersex people, it's not very clear, but again, we can see that it's in this colonial encounter that kind of homophobic discourses first appear in the region. So, as I already said, in Kyrgyzstan, the politics of gender and sexuality resonate very much with global trends and contradictions of homo nationalism, international conservative, and new. Yeah, so I was saying yes, that it was in this colonial encounter that homophobia actually enters Central Asian society, contrary to the belief that Muslim societies are somehow inherently homophobic or always have been. So there is evidence that there was a gender and sexual diversity in Muslim societies, including Central Asian society, and yeah, it was actually on the insistence of the colonial powers that that certain homophobic ideologies were introduced and enforced. So have some features of the Soviet past, as well as the global trends reflected in the current Kyrgyzstani politics of gender and sexuality. So we know that in the Soviet Union, after a brief period of quite radical liberalization of sexuality and gender politics, after the October Revolution, male homosexuality was recriminalized in the European republics in 1934. However, anti-sodomy laws were introduced across Central Asian states, the Central Asian republics, even earlier in the late 20s. And they were, their logic was quite different from the logic of reintroducing them in the European republics, because they were aimed at eradicating crimes constituting survivals of primitive custom, quote unquote, along with such practices as polygamy and paying the bride price. So this sexual exploitation of boy dancers, bachabozi, as well as consensual adult same-sex practices, Bisexual, or ложество in Russian, are considered backward and at odds with the Soviet emancipation agenda for the oppressed peoples of the Orient. So female homosexuality was not criminalized, but it was pathologized within the medical discourse. So for much of Soviet period, homosexuality was designated as belonging either in prison or in a psychiatric ward. And homosexuality then re-entered public discussion during late perestroika years with policy of glasnost, and already in late 80s, first LGBT-themed publications and organizations appeared in the European republics of the Soviet Union, and one of the first magazines was actually called Tema. So after Kyrgyzstan became independent in 1991, a pretty vibrant civil society and dynamic political life emerged. Kyrgyzstan's early queer activism started with creation of organizations dealing with HIV and AIDS, mostly by gay men. In Bishkek and Osh, the two largest cities, they had vibrant gay scenes, and queer clubs were frequented patronized by straight celebrities, members of the police, even Orthodox priests, according to the account of Vladimir Chupin, the founder of the first Kyrgyz gay organization, Oasis. So 90s was a period of kind of unseen liberation and openness for gay and lesbian communities. So Oasis was officially registered as a youth organization in 1995, 3 years before male homosexuality was decriminalized in Kyrgyzstan. So in the early 2000s, a number of LGBT rights NGOs were officially registered. Labris was an organization founded by lesbians and trans people in 2004. And it was originally registered as a women's organization in 2006. And then it was re-registered as an LGBT rights organization in 2010. But of course, LGBT activism and existence remain fraught. There's a conservative turn in the region and in global politics in general since mid-2000s. And so the discourses of traditional values and preservation of the nation kind of arose again. And against this backdrop, many LGBT people and activists face homophobic discrimination and violence in Kyrgyzstan. And we know that in 2014, conservative members of the Kyrgyz parliament introduced a homophobic bill, a so-called gay propaganda bill, which basically is a copy-paste from a Russian bill that was adopted in 2013. So there were a number of attacks on the offices of Labris and events throughout these years. So I'm kind of not saying that there is no homophobia in Kyrgyzstan. There is. So now, just to tell you more about this project. So this project is a participatory action research, and it arose out of kind of a realization that we need to create a kind of a queer sex education curriculum and materials. I was once attending a sex ed training held at the community center of Labris, and I realized that it kind of follows the same pattern as kind of as sex training would go for heterosexual people. So there was no discussion, for instance, of how women could have safe sex with other women and things like that. And then following that discussion, it was decided that there is a need for a project that would identify the actual practices in the community, how people learn about non-heterosexual sex and gender variety, what can we learn from people, what kind of hacks can they share with us, and generally what their experiences were. So we started with focus group discussions, which were also held at the community center. So we had several focus group discussions, which included everyone, and also we have kind of support groups that are only open to specific people with specific identities, like gay, bisexual, and queer men, or lesbian, bisexual, and queer women, and trans people have their own support group where they can discuss things just among themselves. So over around 100 participants attended these discussion groups. So as a kind of emergent from this discussion was then the kind of in-depth biographical interviews. So we recruited 10 people from the community. Basically, they're also LGBTQ people, gay men, lesbian women, bisexual men and women, trans men and women, and non-binary people. They each went out and collected 9 to 12 interviews. So altogether, they were conducted 90 in-depth biographical interviews, 40 minutes to 2.5 hours long, with LGBTQ people ages 18 to 51. Most of them were conducted in Russian, 4 in Kyrgyz, and 2 in kind of a mix of Russian and Kyrgyz. And this was all done in Bishkek in April and May 2018. So although the scope of our study is limited to Bishkek city, we did find that our respondents come from all over, not only Kyrgyzstan but also the region, because Bishkek is a kind of place where a lot of queer people migrate. What do we hear from our respondents? We do hear them kind of refer to themselves as Muslim, and also kind of ethnosexual boundaries are sort of drawn by saying that, in Muslim families we don't discuss things like that, or in Muslim families this sort of thing happens, or in Muslim families I have to do this in relation to my parents, etc. It also relates to how people talk about their degrees of openness and this coming out practice. So a lot of people would not talk openly about their gender identity and sexuality with their families because they cite religiosity as part of that. So, for instance, one respondent who, again, he identifies as a trans man, yet with his partner, he allows his partner to call him her, to basically address him in the feminine gender, basically this person says that it doesn't matter to me, she can call me whatever, but there's a lot of code switching. So he says, when I go out in the street I behave this way, but when I go to visit relatives then it's a different gender presentation. So he says, my little brother prays, he reads namaz, and he's bearded. So he basically told, he says he's a member of this new religion. And he knows that I live with my partner, my female partner, and we are together for more than 8 years. So he told me, the only thing I ask is that you don't interfere in my life and I don't interfere in yours. So here we can see that in a way his brother, because he's probably a member of some kind of less recognized group, maybe like Tablighi Jamaat or something like that, he's probably feeling as vulnerable as this transgender person. The other two sisters also give this person their full support, but a third one is neutral, he says, because she also reads namaz. So if I try to share with her, he says, she pretends I don't hear you. So she doesn't deny anything, but she doesn't approve either. So she just kind of appears neutral. So another thing is that this person is also disabled from birth. They were born with a small, one of their hands is small. So basically, he says that he kind of is grateful to God for giving him this disability, because he could justify his choice of clothing in childhood. That he needed a pocket he needed to wear trousers and not a dress, because he needed to hide his small hand in the pocket of the trousers. So when this person then describes an encounter in a shop where an acquaintance was talking to the salesperson and said that, oh, in our village we have this girl who dresses like a boy, and she brought her girlfriend home and said that she wants to marry her. How can a woman marry another woman? She must be sick. So here I couldn't hold it in anymore, so I said, how could you call her sick? She's not sick. She was born this way, so God created her this way. So basically, he said that, see, I'm disabled. I was born without a hand, and in the same way she was born a man. So basically, that there is this appeal to kind of God and attempt to create this kind of different morality and subjectivity that happens here. Do I have time left?
Actually, we are really running out of time, so if you could conclude in 2 or 3 minutes, please. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
I would say I'm sorry, we're really running out of time, so if you could conclude in 2 or 3 minutes, please. I'm really sorry.
Another example I wanted to give is on the bisexual, okay, I'll skip this one. More textual appeal to text. We found in an interview with a lesbian woman, age 21, whose father, when he found out that she was dating women, sent her to Uzbekistan to stay with relatives. But then gradually, a friend of hers from an LGBT organization in Kyrgyzstan gave her a book about Islam and homosexuality. So she kind of made sure that her father saw this book and read it. So he read it, and so she noticed that he started talking to her, and he told her that just tell me the truth, don't lie to me, just tell me how it is. So there's an ambivalence there about how much he accepted her as a lesbian, but he's religious. He also prays 5 times a day, but basically she noticed that he also does Google searches about these issues, and so she believes that reading that book convinced him that another interpretation of Quran is possible, or that it could be somehow compatible with the religious belief and practice. So I'll stop here, and I would welcome the questions.